Okay, the next few flip videos, we're actually going to start learning about the dominant American political parties. And we are going to talk about some of the third parties, but the two dominant political parties in America presently, and it's been like this for quite a while now, over 100 years, have been the Democrats and the Republican parties. So we're going to kind of look at these pictures to get an idea of what they believe and where they're at. And people use these terms all the time to define Democrats and Republicans. And the other videos will get into their specific ideology, or what's called their dogma, their real strong beliefs within the parties. But just to start out, let's look on the left, and you can see to the left of the arrows, the pictures on the left, liberal equals left. So people that are considered liberal, people say they're to the left of the political spectrum. And that actually might not be that accurate, but in American politics, to the left is liberal. You can see the Democratic Party started in 1824. It's actually the older of the two parties. And the donkey is kind of like the mascot or represents the party. However, it's not official. It's just a image that we see in all kinds of news and media, and when people run ads and they look at how people vote, they'll show the donkey to represent the Democrats. So they're on the left side of the political spectrum. On the other end is the right side, which is called the conservative right, or the Republican Party, and they're a newer party. They started in 1854, but they're referred to as the GOP a lot. A GOP stands for Grand Old Party. So while they're newer, they're referred to as the Grand Old Party. And what's interesting about the Democrats and Republicans is in American history you'll learn that the Democrats and Republicans kind of switch. The things they believe today probably would have been the opposite about 100 years ago. So for example, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and he was president of the United States. He would clearly be a Democrat today. He believed in strong government and regulation and a strong central government, and that is a very Democrat idea. Republicans tend to believe in more states' rights. So Andrew Jackson, who is considered kind of the original Democratic leader, would probably be more of a Republican today than a Democrat, because he was for strong state rights. Now, who gets caught up in the middle of this is the middle or the moderate voter. And we call them independent voters because we don't know if they're going to vote Democrat or Republican, and they might actually vote for other parties. And some of the other parties we'll talk about would be like the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Constitution Party, just to name a few. And they can even be, those parties tend to be more conservative or more liberal than the Democrats and Republicans. So when we're talking about voting, we can see that we have an elephant and a donkey, and the picture's kind of funny. They're fighting each other, and what are they fighting over? The independent voter. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense, because if you're a Democrat and you have an election coming, where would you spend all your money and resources? Okay, you're probably going to spend it to fight and get the votes of the independent voters, because we don't know how they're going to vote. Would you spend money or time on the Democrats? Maybe some, but the Democrats said, I told you, I'm going to vote Democrat. So why would you spend a lot of money on somebody that says they're going to vote Democrat or work hard to try to get them to vote Democrat? That would be a waste of time. Also, on the other end, if you're a Democrat and you're trying to get the Republicans to vote Democrat, after they said, I'm a Republican, I'm going to vote Republican, again, that would be futile or useless. It's not going to do much. So we find out is that people a lot of times have actually made up their minds before they even go into the voter's box. And those people just kind of cancel each other out. So the Democrats show up, they vote Democrat, the Republicans vote Republican. And actually in many states, and that's changing in Missouri, you can actually just mark a box that says, with a donkey, it says Democrat, or elephant, it says Republican, and you don't even look at the names of the people you're voting for. You just vote what's called a straight party ticket, where you vote for all the Republicans that are running for the state of Missouri and the government, and that's it, and you walk away. It's quicker to vote this way, but it's also kind of dangerous in the sense of you're not even looking at the people you vote. So how do you know what their beliefs are? So that's why we're going to use these couple of videos to kind of get into what is the difference between Democrats and Republicans. And we'll find out that these are generalizations, which means that most of the time they believe this. And it is based on truth. However, there are many Democrats and Republicans that do not believe all these things or disagree with certain topics. That's why you, as an informed voter, should read about the different candidates or learn about what the different candidates believe and then make your final selection on who's the best candidate for you. And you may find out it might not be a Democrat or Republican. It could be somebody from another party. But we have to define what these parties believe in. So let's look at how this works in the United States, how people tend to vote. And we're going to watch the videos in class, so we're not going to do that now. So let's just look at the picture and get some data and some actual results of voting. So to the top left, you have a pie chart, political party registered members. Okay, so these are the people that are registered, and they clearly see themselves one way or another. What group is the largest dominant group? And that's actually the Democrats. About 72 million people vote Democrat. They claim to be Democrats. They register as Democrats. And the second largest group is the Republicans at about 55 million people. So there's a pretty big chunk more Democrats, or people that see themselves as Democrats over Republicans. And actually, it's interesting, the smallest group, the people that probably have the most power because we don't know what they're going to do and we try to influence them if you're a Democrat or Republican, are the independent voters. And there are only about 42 million people. So almost a third of Americans kind of view themselves as Democrats, close to that as Republicans, and a very small group see themselves as independent voters. Now, this is just based on surveys and registration and people identifying themselves. Now, what it doesn't tell you is no. Are all those people going to show up to vote? And the answer is no. Democrats tend to have lower turnouts for voting, especially on years when it's not presidential elections. So while a lot of Democrats came out for the 2008 election of Barack Obama, not as many came out in the 2010 election for their senators and their representatives. So the Republicans had gotten a majority of the House of Representatives because the Democrats did not show up. If everybody were to vote in America based on the data on how and what people tell us, the Democrats would dominate the federal government pretty much every year. But we do know that not everybody does vote, and Democrats don't vote as much as Republicans. Republicans recognize that they are a minority in the political arena, and they're much more likely to vote in almost all elections than Democrats. But with that said, many hardcore Democrats show up as well. But it's the independent voters a lot of times that make the real decisions because they can swing the vote to the Republicans or the Democrats. So we call that a swing vote. In states that we don't know are going to be Democrat or Republican, we call it swing states. And actually, Missouri used to be very much a swing state. Missouri would go Democrat for president or Republican. It was all over the place. They were Democrat for Bill Clinton, then they were Republican for George Bush, and we have pretty much stayed Republican since then. They voted for Mitt Romney and the Bushes, so Obama has not received the majority in Missouri, and that indicates that there's a dominance of the Republicans in Missouri today, different than about 15 or 20 years ago. Also, we have a supermajority in the General Assembly, which means that our senators and representatives in the state of Missouri are predominantly Democrat, and they have such a big vote that they can override the veto of the governor of Missouri, who is a Democrat. So there is some power on the Democratic Party in Missouri. Also, we divide our senators. We have Claire McCaskill, who's a Democrat, and Roy Blunt, who's a Republican. So we have a Democrat and Republican senator. And amongst the state, most state representatives are Republican, but Lacey Clay is a Democrat from St. Louis, so it's not all Republican. So the question is Missouri still a swing state? And most political analysts will say no. No, mostly Republican today, but that could change. We don't know. All right, so let's talk about Missouri. Let's look at the states and the regions of the United States and how they vote. And I like this map because this is the actual results of the Electoral College votes and the winning election of 2008 for Barack Obama. And I chose this map because it really kind of shows you how the states line up in terms of voting Democrat and Republican. So blue represents the Democrats on a political map usually, and red is usually Republicans. So when we look at political maps or they talk about politics and voting, they usually use those colors to represent those parties. So let's start in the top corner. So up northeast, so New York, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, and the top type right right corner is the Northeast. So it really ends with Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So that area has lots and lots of people, and they vote predominantly Democrat. Democrats tend to dominate the Northeast. So there's a lot of votes coming from the Northeast. Even though it's such a small piece of land in America, it has a lot of people that actually vote there. New York City, the biggest city in America, with 8 million people, tends to vote Democrat. They have had a Republican mayor. They had Rudolph Giuliani for years, who was Republican, and they just changed over to a Democratic mayor pretty recently. So now if you go southeast, and we don't call that area southeast, we call that area the South. So the South of the United States, as you can see, is predominantly red. They tend to vote Republican. Texas is the biggest Republican voting state in the United States, and they almost always vote Republican. However, there is a lot of data and information that says that's changing. In the next 20 years, they're predicted to start voting Democrat because they have such a huge Hispanic population, and a lot of immigrants or people who come from other countries move to Texas, and they have fast-growing cities like Austin, which is very Democrat, are growing. So we may see Texas in 20 years from now, in your lifetime, become a very Republican or Democrat place. We'll see. On the West Coast, and you can see California, Oregon, and Washington, you don't just go surfing out there. You have a predominantly Democrat, very liberal Democrat areas where Boston, New York, Northeast are Democrat. So California and the Northeast are similar in the way they vote. Now, in the middle of the country, you have the Midwest, starting with Missouri and up, and you can see, in this case, they're mostly Democrat, but there's still a lot of Kansas, Nebraska. They went Republican. So the Midwest is really just that. It's in the middle. We have a lot of swing states, and people go Democrat, Republican. However, the states around the lakes tend to go Democrat, like Wisconsin, Michigan. Illinois is very Democrat. Minnesota tends to go Democrat. But they're in Iowa, but they're not always Democrat. They go Republican as well. So that Midwest is kind of all over the place. That's a good. You'll see a lot of politicians campaign in the Midwest to try to get votes because they don't know how it's going to go. They're not going to spend a lot of time in New York and California because those tend to vote Democrat, and they're not going to spend a lot of time in Texas or Alabama because they almost always vote Republican. So that would be not a waste of time. And then you can see the mountain states like Idaho, Wyoming, Montana tend to be Republican. Alaska is Republican, while Hawaii splits the vote as Democrat. Now, I've had students say, Mr. Metropoulos, doesn't make any sense, though. If you look at the map, most of the land in America is red. It's Republican, so the Republicans should always win. How did Barack Obama get 365 electoral votes and John McCain only got 173 in 2008? And the answer is this. There's hardly anybody that lives in those states. Montana has maybe 600,000 people, and look at it. It's close to the size of Texas. It's huge. But it has maybe the population of South County and South St. Louis, maybe the city, for the whole entire state of Montana. While Missouri, the state we live in, has 6 million people vote to represent and has many more representative districts. Are what's interesting is with voting, and we'll talk about there's the branch of governments, they are not balanced. So states that are small have 2 senators, and they get more electoral vote, are the same amount of electoral votes as big states in terms of population. So California's got almost 40 million people, okay, 35 to 40 million people. Montana's only got 600,000 people. How many senators does Montana get? 2. How many does California get? 2. So think about that. That means that 40 million people are only represented with 2 electoral votes for California, and then that's as well with Montana. But now, with their representatives from the House of Representatives, they get 1 electoral vote for about 400,000 people, 500,000 people around that area. So that's pretty equal or balanced. So California has a lot of electoral votes because they have lots of people, and they get the House of Representative votes for every House of Representative and senator. But they have more than Montana because of their population, but still Montana has a little bit more power individually if you're in Montana because you get 3 electoral votes for Montana even though there's not many people in your state. Very interesting system. And then in Washington, D.C., they actually don't really they actually don't get to vote for federal positions. They're assumed to be representative because they are the capital of the United States. And there's a lot of debate about that. So just to summarize what we learned about today, you can see that there's two dominant parties, and boy, do they dominate. Most people do not consider themselves independent voters. So with a two-party system, you're going to run into some issues. And we found out, just to get an idea how powerful these guys are, they spent over $1 billion on the last presidential election, on all the candidates running. $1 billion on one election, on advertisement, and getting people to be in charge of the government to win their elections. They're now, because the Supreme Court ruled it's okay to spend as much money as you want on elections, there are wealthy people that really wrote checks for millions of dollars and gave it to interest groups to try to get these guys elected. And it's legal as long as the government knows where the money's going and what's being used for. So can you imagine if you had $1 billion to spend on advertisement? What's the chances of you winning an election versus somebody who has no money at all? So founding fathers had actually, George Washington was a big person to warn us of the danger of political parties. And what we found out is that in the world today, almost all governments that have a republic, a representative government, have political parties. People come together naturally. People come together and they put their money and power together. And they realize that you're stronger as an interest group or a political party than you are as an individual voting for the right candidate. And we talked about how they even vote based on just a party and don't ask questions. So we're going to look at what these parties believe, and you can kind of decide if you identify with either one of the parties, or maybe you're an independent voter or you're a third-party voter. You like a third party. So that's it for today. We're going to start with the Democrats in the next video, and we'll move on to the Republicans, and then we'll talk about the other parties. Thanks for checking in. Bye.